any system can throw out loads and loads of data, but until it's organised in a fashion and presented in an appropriate way that makes it understandable and hits home, I think you're almost wasting your time, because it then becomes such a big package that no one can actually find what the real salient points in that management information is.
Welcome back to the Katchr Podcast. Today, we're speaking with someone who's been working with law firms nearly as long as I have. So Peter, welcome to the Katchr Podcast. For anyone that doesn't know you, you're a partner at Menzies. You've advised hundreds of law firms over the years, and you've written extensively about financial management, operational discipline, and sustainable law firm growth. So today, we're going to weave together a few of the themes that we've talked about recently: management information, marketing, ROI, risk and compliance, succession, M&A. So, Peter, welcome, and let's get into it.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me along.
So, you said before that management information needs to be timely, reliable, and understandable, but also that it needs to capture the imagination. I think that was the phrase you used. What's behind that last phrase, capturing the imagination?
I think the thing here is that what you actually want it to be is relevant to all levels within law firms, whether that be the managing partners, whether that be the accounts team themselves, or whether that be the fee earners and the people who are working on the transactions or cases. Interested to listen to a couple of your previous podcasts you did, which I thought were excellent. Then one, it seemed to talk about a bit of a disconnect between the lawyers and the accountants as regards management information in particular. And then I rather cheekily looked at a couple of your client testimonials on your website. And therefore I did wonder whether the point about this disconnect can be solved so many times through the scoping and the planning of the management information, and therefore what everybody wants to get out of it at those levels I talked about. Certainly the one of the testimonials talks that they talk our language, talking about Katchr. And the other point is that one says they feel confident enough to challenge and recognise performance of their team members by virtue of what they're getting out of the management information. So I think, first of all, it's crucial to fully understand exactly that point, what you want to get out of it. I think the point timely, reliable, understandable is entirely relevant. You don't want management information that's coming out 4 or 5 months after the end of a particular period, and you obviously want it to be reliable because it's something you're taking decisions on. If you look at one of those quotes about the individual levels being able to challenge and recognise performance of team members, it would be very embarrassing for a fee earner with an assistant to go to them one week and say, I'm not impressed at all with your production in the last month or so, to then have to go back and go, oops, sorry, a couple of the weeks hadn't uploaded, and therefore your overtime you worked in those couple of weeks wasn't actually recorded that time, so apologies. So on probably one of the lower level interactions you might get in a law firm, that's an example where it has to be relevant and reliable, as well as those reliable, timely and understandable. I think you can then move on to the fact that it needs to be all the interested parties need to have that input into what they want to get out of it. The point about capturing the imagination is that you actually want people to be engaged and invested in the information they're looking at. We'll all have dashboards on our computers to tell us what our production time is, how much we're billing, how much we're collecting, the normal engine of any law firm, any professional services firm, to be fair. But again, it needs to be capturing each individual as they're looking at it. So it might be that they're very, very interested in the average length of a case that's taking, perhaps, but that might be in personal injury work, so that our case is taking so much longer. Are they getting the responses? It might be that it's important to set when deadlines are upcoming, and that again can come out of the management information. It might be that they need to be reminded of cases they haven't worked on for a period of time. Again, that can be a massively key piece of information, a KPI, if you like, for people at a certain level. Once you then go up to managing partners, they may be looking at departmental profit, and therefore what's the productivity of a department versus budgeting that department. They'll then be looking at cash flows projecting out from the firm as a whole. And then you feed back into the finance team who are looking at the overall picture and wondering what funding they might need to put in place for the next year or so. So I think at all levels, you need to have a champion group that get together beforehand to then say, what do we all want out of this software so that it gives us what we want? It means that we can work as efficiently as possible so that we all understand what we're about, what we're supposed to be doing, and ultimately what the firm as a whole is looking to achieve. So accuracy is absolutely key, as I said. And again, on perhaps a point here relating back to some of the systems that are being installed at the moment, I could be controversial and say that the salesmen are absolutely brilliant on some of the systems that are getting installed in law firms. Unfortunately, it's the follow-up, it's the post-installation help desk, it's the training, where people all of a sudden are uttering that phrase, "Oh, if only we could have the old system back." I think that's the sort of thing you need to guard against when you look at the new systems, because again, people have to trust the systems, trust what's coming off of the systems. And again, perhaps another thing to just mention here, we've seen a lot of systems linking into Xero, for example, and probably just one tip from what we've seen a few times now is the fact that firms that have a lot of disbursements going on, quite often the disbursements control account can go rather awry because the links aren't working properly between the two systems. So again, something certainly to look out for there.
Yeah.
I can recall our briefing conversation, Graham. We mentioned the topic that gets most solicitors quite emotional at the moment. That's interest received. I think is often one, especially as the consultation by the SRA towards the back end of last year. Consultations shut February time, I think, and they sent out a bit of a missive saying that they probably weren't going to follow through with some of the things that was referred to in that, but a lot of annoyance, anger, whatever the adjective is, from a lot of law firms, a lot of law societies, and accountants that responded to the consultation as well. That the SRA were almost saying that interest received was a bit of a bad word, and it really isn't something that should be happening still in the client relationship. And it was almost suggesting that almost all, or at least a bulk of the interest received shouldn't be appearing in the law firm's accounts, but should be given back to the client. Now, even before that consultation, what we were suggesting to law firms is they draw up their management information excluding interest received, so that what they've got then is a core practice profit and loss account, rather than one that's perhaps masked quite a bit by the interest received at the present moment in time, with interest rates being where they are. Probably the firms that I have got some sympathy with in that respect are the more conveyancing heavy firms, where if the interest rates weren't so high, perhaps conveyancing would be given the shot in the arm, and therefore interest rates going down, conveyancing transactions going up, so that there might be a natural balance found there. But certainly would definitely recommend that firms are not relying on that interest received in the future or now, and therefore drawing up management information without it, so that no one's deluded by performance in that respect.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really good point there. I think something, it does get overlooked, and it's a risk, isn't it? That you can become over reliant on that. One of the things we see at Katchr is law firms produce huge amounts of data, but very little of it changes how people actually behave. What would you say the common mistakes you see in firms that you come across?
I think behaviour is entirely the right word there. I think people can use the word culture gets bandied around quite a lot, but I actually prefer just to draw it back and just go, look, actually culture is all about behaviour, and all of us have been taught how to behave from a very, very young age. Now, I'm not saying that means that that the data that is produced means that partners or fee earners need to be put on naughty steps all the time. But actually, metaphorically, perhaps in some respects, that's what the data should be telling us. Now, any system can throw out loads and loads of data, but until it's organised in a fashion and presented in an appropriate way that makes it understandable and hits home, I think you're almost wasting your time, because it then becomes such a big package that no one can actually find what the real salient points in that management information is. So again, I do think that comes back to the scoping and what KPIs would actually drive the right behaviours from the teams in general. And I think it's really important at this point, and I know that it will be repeated later on in our discussion, that these behaviours have to come from the top. If partners are not displaying day by day the correct behaviours, then the teams underneath them will think they've got an excuse not to as well. If you're pricing up a job and you've got this historical information that tells you that the price should be X, and the team member says, I think we should be bidding £10,000 for this transaction, and the partner says, well, I'm not so sure about that, I think we really should bid in 7, and then the team member says, well, actually, we lost money on chargeable time the last time at that sort of level. I think it's those sort of things that can undo a lot of good behaviour by just one bit of bad behaviour, and therefore partners need to buy into where the overall strategy is hopefully taking them. And again, from the website, there's talk about pricing and understanding how you price matters previously, actually what costs ended up being, and therefore the profitability of those matters. So if history is telling you that you got the price wrong, therefore use that data, which is readily available in most systems, to actually guide you in the future rather than frankly ignoring it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So if you had to pick one metric, just one, that tells you more about the health of a law firm than anything else, what would you say that would be?
If I had to pick one, and only because it was a chapter in my book, Brighter Thinking for Law Firms, that actually I didn't realise it was 7 years ago now, to be fair, but thanks to a number of my colleagues in the Menzies legal team, we're just drafting up version 2. So there will be a repeat coming out. But yeah, the title of one of the chapters was The Production Driver. Now, that's all about getting time onto the ledger and then deciding at the time you're going to bid it, how much you're going to bill. But if you haven't got the productivity, you're not going to get the billing, and frankly, at that point, you're struggling to understand what your actual capacity is. So again, it's the behaviours around getting that productive time recognised on the ledgers. So I think that production driver has always been one of my favourites. Perhaps that's got something to do with me completing timesheets for 38 years now. So that's probably got something to do with it as well.
Yeah.
I haven't been used to anything else, I'm afraid.
It's still the engine in professional services, definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so let's pivot now into marketing. And one of the things you said to me recently was that firms spend money on marketing, but very few measure the return. Why would you say that is?
Again, I mean, that's, thank you for phrasing that back. That's made it a very good question. What I would say is that, the measurement of it has to come from what is the return on investment. So you're spending money, and perhaps in this day and age, it's on search engine optimization, for example, and you're focusing on certain areas. My concern at times is that the focus of that marketing spend, that marketing effort, is quite often either towards the departments that are perhaps loss making or perhaps the smallest, and therefore can they actually make a huge difference, or perhaps because that's where the managing partner or the partner with the loudest voice is residing, and therefore are the decisions being made on a sound financial return on investment basis, and are they in line with the hopefully well mapped out strategic plan of the practice. My point about marketing spend on the most loss making features area, I have seen happen many times, but it's one that never really gets concluded. It's at the moment. Sadly, we've had budgets and may have another one next week, as we're speaking in mid-November. The focus is again on pension, inheritance tax, etc., and therefore at that point, I would like to think law firms were perhaps promoting the private client work, wills and inheritance tax planning departments, and those teams getting busy and trying to focus that time and effort to ensure that those areas of the practice are getting filled up with good and new work. So I think that's where I would hope the focus was on areas that are well thought through and match the overall marketing strategy, which should link into the overall firm strategy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what would you say good marketing MI looks like in a law firm?
I think there's two aspects to it. I think there's the external and the internal. External, I suppose, covers the partly the point I've just made about the what's the spend versus the reward, and then that external and internal then being split out in the actual file openings, because one of the reports I do like that comes off of almost the most basic system that many law firms have is the number of files opened in a particular period. Now, as with any data, using the phrase you used earlier on, Graham, I think the fact that if you've got data from 2 or 3 years and you can chart file openings over a period of time, then you might actually get to a point where you're able to predict capacity, etc., and stuff like that. And that's where marketing and business development does link in quite well with the other teams, the other parts of the strategy. So I think that data there on file openings split between externally generated and where it came from. So that's a question that people don't always ask. How did you hear about the firm? Now, we should all be doing that, because in this day and age, it's not often the sign over the door on the high street these days. It's someone's Googled private client law firms in Farnborough or Woking or Huddersfield or wherever it may be, frankly, and therefore you would hope your own firm was somewhere near the top of that. Now, if you're not getting the click through and be able to measure that, then perhaps there's a problem with your approach to Google, etc. Coming full circle into the intern, this should be the area where the lowest hanging fruit are. And I think many law firms and accountancy firms, I'm not going to pretend otherwise, probably realise that this is an area that we haven't always got right. And I tend to use the example of a client that comes in, sells a house, typical conveyancing transaction, and are entirely satisfied with the service they've got. They do a 5-star Google review and they never hear from the firm again. You never quite understand why 2 months later, the private client team, wills team, inheritance tax team don't ring them up and say, you've had a life-changing event. Perhaps you ought to put some wills in place, LPAs, or just generally some inheritance tax planning because of what you've now moved to, etc. You've got such a warm target at that point that I always think it's a shame that again, low-hanging fruit gets missed. So I think it needs to be inherent in your normal week. I think marketing and BD needs to be more habitual than it is for all of us for present perhaps, and therefore you do have those moments where you stand back and think about the clients you've just done an excellent piece of work for and who you can then introduce them to in your firm and maybe add a system further. And I really don't think we follow that up well enough. And I don't mean an email, I actually mean a phone call. I know that it's perhaps a bit old school these days, but I still think that is the way to go. So you need to stand out from the crowd and try and take advantage where you have an advantage. And if you've got a truly satisfied client, then that is an advantage to take account of.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think you talked before about the lack of collaboration really between teams in terms of business development. It's that you say low hanging fruits.
Yeah, and it's I think collaboration is a word that often appears on visions and how we approach life. But at times people are far too tunneled in their own practice area, and should be ensuring that the client is looked up in that. And again, we're going to jump onto risk and compliance at some point soon. But what everyone should remember is that referring a client with a need to an expert within your firm isn't just a good internal BD approach. It's something that reduces risk anyway, because you're getting the right person to do the right piece of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned risk and compliance there. So moving on to that, a whole host of different elements of this, debtors and WEPs, solicitors accounts rules. Talk us a little bit about some of the dangers that firms might be almost sleepwalking into. What would you say are the biggest risks right now?
So the sleepwalking, I suppose we could go back to the interest received masking what the actual performance is. So I think that's one to pick off. I think it also we can then almost rewind right to the beginning when we chatted about scoping and planning what you want from your system. Now, one very important input into that planning and scoping should absolutely be your risk and compliance team, because there are certain things that they're going to want to be aware of. If we look at solicitors' accounts rules for the moment, I mean, one of the hot topics of the SRA for the last 10 years probably has been residual balances. And I fully get that, because if something's sitting there with residual balances, it's not supposed to be a nice way to earn a little bit extra interest. It's supposed to be something that have been cleared off, because you should be only holding balances when there's actually a legal transaction going on. And the point here that I think people often feel the SRA are only focusing on this simply from the point of view of the solicitor holding money for too long and getting interest. Well, actually, the main focus is, why is that client matter still open? Is there something that hasn't been closed off properly and is therefore a risk? The risk and compliance team, I think, should be on a quarterly basis at minimum, getting a list of residual balances run off the system, ones that haven't been worked on for a period of time, and being given the authority by managing partner to be able to go around and actually hold fairness to account why these monies are still sitting there, because it is quite often flagging up a risk. The same thing is true, and you mentioned work in progress and age debt. If we all think about the profile of work in progress and debtors that we office balances that we see on our ledgers, the ones in the current column are probably okay. If they started to nudge across to 30 and 60, they should be getting the appropriate robust follows up from credit control. It's the ones that progress beyond that. We need to understand what the reason is. Now, if it's in debtors, yeah, you've already issued a fee note. Now, at that point, there has to be an inquiry or an intrigue as to why the client hasn't paid it. Well, they're not fully satisfied with the service they received. Was it not at the exact price that was agreed? Or perhaps any change orders, increases in fees were not communicated properly throughout it, and that's why they're holding on to it. So I think the debtor one is often the easier one to nail down. And because often firms are so fees bill driven on a monthly basis, sometimes the focus is too much on debtors rather than on the work in progress. Because if you're in a transaction that's going on, that perhaps there's been a bit of backwards to and fro with the client, and perhaps they're not overly happy with the service at that point in time, and things haven't gone particularly well. Well, perhaps that's the reason it's not being billed, and perhaps the reason it's not being billed is because it's that moment that might actually trigger an unhappy client complaining about the fee and the service. Now, if clients are complaining about service, then does that suggest that in that department, that individual, that there are problems? Perhaps they're overworked, and that productive capacity I mentioned earlier hasn't identified that there's an issue. There's a understaffed department that we need to do something about. So I think that sort of stuff needs to be a focus of the risk and compliance team. The other thing that I have a slightly alternative view on, I suppose, is the breaches register. It is mentioned by the SRA. I'm always staggered how little it's populated at times when we go in to do our accountant's report. And there are times when we're listing out our management letter points. Yeah, some of them are blatantly trivial, but there are also points that should have been put onto the breaches register. The breaches register is all about identifying trends that are happening and things that are continuously going wrong. And so I think people have always believed that something that should be populated as little as possible, and that means that you've got a compliant firm that's doing really well. Well, I actually look at it the other way around. I'd rather see it nicely populated, because that would suggest that you've got a okay to be mentioning that they've got the occasional thing wrong, and therefore how can we learn from that, and how can we put appropriate systems and policies in place to ensure they don't happen again?
Yeah, it's all about showing that you've got that process, and you can deal with and manage the issues rather than, as you the opposite, which is if there's nothing, it's probably just because it's not been exposed, not because it's really not there.
And it's not being taken seriously. And my concern would be if you're not taking your breaches seriously, are you serious about compliance? And that it's everybody's responsibility. I'm not picking on fee earners. If partners got portfolios with fee earners that have got WIP that's going across the right hand side of the screen, then they need to be focusing on that as well.
Yeah. So talking about risk, one of the biggest risks for any business, obviously, is financial fragility. It's essentially running out of cash. What are the sort of signs that you look for? What are the what are the warning signs that something might be going wrong?
I think I'll try and remember to come back to my favourite, which is liquidity. But what I will say is that during COVID, the old sensitivity analysis seemed to come back into vogue for a couple of years, frankly. And that served an awful number of practices really, really well, because they were understandably wondering where the next conveyance was going to come from in those early couple of months. So very worrying time. And as much as we were all working from home at the time, my kids said they saw less of me when I was working from home during that period than they did when I was in the office. And they also decided that I said furlough about 1,000 times in a month, because that was actually so much of the planning that went into law firms and their sensitivity analysis that we were looking at in that period. The trouble is now there's no furlough to fall back on. So I think actually sensitivity analysis in this quite uncertain terms going into 2026, I think sensitivity analysis, which identifies those peaks and troughs in cash flow, it's really, really important to be able to try and predict that. And I know we briefly chatted before we start the podcast about how AI may become that predictive tool that's needed to understand from the moment you take on clients. I talked about file openings earlier on. Well, what is the average time from file opening through to billing? What's your average time through to getting the cash in? And then using all of that in an interactive three-way forecast. You've got your balance sheet, your profit and loss, and your cash flow, all interactive. That can therefore predict your cash flows. It can predict whether you are going to run out of money, and therefore whether partners are always going to get the drawings they expect they're getting. Generally, if there's any warning about that, you'll find their behaviours on WIP and debtors seem to go up a bit of a notch, and especially if someone's suggesting they ought to be introducing some more capital. It's amazing how quickly the WIP figures and the debtors come down at that point. And that probably brings me on to liquidity, as I referred to earlier. We could go back to the big law firms that went bust, probably 20 years ago now. We did both say good words in the sector a long time, Graham. But if you were to look back at those law firms, it's the balance sheets that were filed, the last balance sheets that were filed at Companies House before they just happened to go into liquidation about 18 months later. Balance sheet day 18 months later. Well, lo and behold, their liquidity ratios were at or just under 1 when you compare their debtors' cash with creditors less than 1 year. And therefore, I think if you're looking to find that early indicator, it's where that liquidity ratio is headed. It is probably the most important thing I would focus on. But coming back to the productivity, that's your driver. Are we opening as many files as we were last year? Where does our growth coming from? Because it's all right well having production capacity, but if you haven't got the work to feed it, then that's where you have to make other decisions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But in terms of managing, that liquidity, and if somebody wants to materially improve their WIP and debtor management, over the next 90 days, what are the highest leverage actions they could take?
I think what will often happen is a firm has if we start with debtors, they've got certain procedures in place. There's probably a statement that goes out, and then there's probably a policy that is followed up with a much sterner letter a month later, and then is truly handed over to credit control. Well, what will happen is that the statement will go out and somebody won't sign off on the first month after letter that should go automatically, and then it's handed to credit control, but it gets the partner or the fee earner says, no, they're an excellent client. They really are an excellent client. So no need to call them, probably because there's some build-up going on of work in progress and stuff like that. And he's thinking, I've got to worry about my next bill rather than the one that hasn't been paid yet. Well, I would suggest if they really are a really, really good client, then perhaps they should be paying your bills on time. So I think the other thing always to look at is that combined exposure of debtors and work in progress, because as part of the procedure combining the two, there should be exposure limits that are set in place for and they can be reminders that come off of the dashboard and system, so that everyone's got them flashing on their screen when they dare to charge you more time to them. That actually you shouldn't really be working in this job because we're out for £70,000 worth of combined WIP and debtors, and therefore we feel our exposure is too high. And that's a level that would be set by the management of the firm with the finance team having an opinion as well. Which is always a bit more difficult perhaps to navigate than debtors. Debtors is there's a fee, you collect it. WIP, yeah, I mean, you could, if you put in we expect the fee to be this, and you're 3/4 of the way up to that expected fee, then you should be looking to bill something. The system should be telling you to bill something, and you should be getting a reminder from the head of department or getting that dreaded phone call from the managing partner.
Yeah, it's that focus of on the client as a whole, all the work for that client, and as you say, combining the debtors and the WIP, because they're both equal exposure, aren't they? Yeah. So another topic that we've talked about was succession and M&A and sort of planning for the future within firms. And succession, I think, is becoming a critical theme these days. It gets talked about certainly at all the conferences I go to, especially in mid-sized firms. So what would you say is driving the urgency right now?
I think it's there's an element of if people are watching the video of this, I've got a haircut, and I'm probably an age of a partner in a law firm that should certainly be considering succession. I think what happens is that people get to an age, and they then think, it'd be nice to retire in a couple of years' time, and they look around the office and go, perhaps I should have started planning for this a little bit more than now, because the easiest route to succession is to train it up and have it internally. And I genuinely don't think that's impossible in mid-sized practices that you refer to, because as long as succession is identified early enough, then they can be trained through and motivated to stay. I think often people don't have those conversations early enough. So I think many a potential successor has left the practice simply because the discussion weren't taking place. I mean, certainly some of the work that here at Menzies and a number of my Menzies colleagues have done around succession and aligning the plans of the practice with the plans of the individual has bared fruit. You actually end up with the right people leading the teams and the right succession coming through, because you actually want succession to come through, because they should be the ones who are paying your capital out. I mean, you can you can go off into retirement when you were planning to, rather than get to that 2-year point, ringing up a broker or your accountant going, I don't suppose you know a law firm that would buy me, do you please? And then that progress is a little bit, it's tricky if you haven't prepared for it at that point. And I think it's the preparation for that and making sure that's done many years in advance is probably the key message I would give at that point.
Yeah. And do you think this is linked to the sort of uptick in M&A activity that we're seeing now?
I think so. I mean, I can look at the in the accountancy sector. We're very proud to be independent, and we're certainly not looking for the private equity at the moment. We've just done a pretty large merger and become a national firm. So that's not something we're looking at. But certainly I've seen examples of medium-sized law firms where that private equity money has been offered, and frankly, probably not at the appropriate value for their practice. But it's been taken simply because there was no other alternative planned for, which is a shame. So I've certainly been in situations where I've helped put practices together that, and therefore that appears to be one where you can plan in a slightly shorter timescale, where especially if the practices know each other and are comfortable with each other already, then that's something that can work. But again, those sort of connections need to be made over a period of time. It's not often something that you discuss 1 month and happens 2 months later. It's not. That's generally not how quickly these things happen. Hence the plan. And again, as we would both say, law firms should have at least a 5-year plan, and not one that's left in a drawer, but one that's actually revisited fairly regularly. Now, if that 5-year plan is discussed with the owners of the practice, and the partners generally, perhaps, in the fact that it says our plan is that within 5 years we're going to find someone to merge with. Now, I'm not saying that they would be the acquirer or the seller in that merger, because it never really is a merger. But I think as long as there's a strategy that fully understands where they're headed, and if the if the strategic plan is to find a acquiring practice, then I'd absolutely support that sort of plan, as long as it's a plan that everyone's going to drive through and try and make happen, rather than just sort of toddling along as practice always has done, and thinking there'll be this magic succession wand that's waved, and lo and behold, 3 brilliant 40-year-old fee earners turn up on the doorstep and want to be recruited. Well, that probably isn't going to happen, and therefore it does need that planning for.
Yeah, and you mentioned that 5-year plan. So, what are the other key things that maybe the top 3 things that plan should be mapping out?
I think, firstly, if I look at the work that we've probably done in this sort of area in the past, the plan should firstly identify, have we got the right people running the practice? Now, whether that means that you need a non-lawyer to be managing the practice or not, I'm certainly not going to go into that on this podcast. But I think often especially heads of departments, just happen to be the most senior person in that department, and therefore, again, I think a good deep dive into the management structure of the practice, the people in charge. Are they dynamic enough? Are they ones that can truly take the practice forward? And then down to the next heads of departments, as they're known. Are they again the people who have the enthusiasm and the respect of the teams that can actually drive that team. Are they the type of individuals that would encourage collaboration between the teams and those easy wins that I referred to earlier? So I think that is key. I think having a very strong, robust infrastructure around accounts and systems and making sure that that is there and can support any growth that might be happening. And again, if I look at one of the quotes that you had on your website is we use something that we call ABC analysis, which is activity, billing, and cash, three of the fundamentals. Well, I think we now go to I happily use the same three, but I'd actually put reinvest at the end of it as well. Now, that's not going to be popular with many partners because activity, billing, cash is normally then followed by drawings. Well, at times you have to reinvest in the practice. That might be in better systems, that might be better property, that might be a better look around ESG and stuff like that, just to see exactly where your practice is in that journey as well. Because again, I think all of these things that I'm mentioning here are things that can retain or attract key people, which you need for your strategy going forward. So I think if I'm now on number 3 that you asked me to get to, it's probably making sure you've got the key right people in all those roles and you understand how you're going to retain them. And if you need to attract any, you need to know how you're going to attract them. And hopefully those key talented people will begin to attract key clients, new clients, through that culture. And therefore I said I wouldn't use the word, those appropriate behaviours that everyone's got, that means you can follow that 5-year plan and prosper from it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably a great place to leave this, how to prosper. So Peter, yeah, this has been great. Lots of practical ideas and some useful warnings as well. So if anyone listening to this wants to follow your work or read more of your thinking, how do they get in touch with you? What's the best place for them to go?
Probably mobile is probably best. Very happy to take a call. 07801 705 384. And Menzies website, you'll find out that there's a whole team of people very used to advising law firms. It's absolutely not just me. There's a great team who, as I said, contribute nicely to the second edition of the book as well. Yeah. I mean, finally, thank you again for having me, Graham. It's been it's been enjoyable, and it's always good to chat with people who have been in the sector as long or almost as long as I have. So good to talk, as I say.
Yeah, thanks for joining me, Peter. And to everyone else listening, if you found today valuable, please subscribe, share it with a colleague, and we'll see you in the next episode.